The black dress was still damp at the collar when Harriet's voice came through the bedroom door. Wait, Harriet is on the used list. Let me write this cleanly. The black dress was still damp at the collar when the knock came. Genevieve Marsh had been standing at the mirror for 10 minutes, not really looking at herself, just standing there while the August heat pressed against the windows of her mother-in-law's house and the voices of funeral guests floated up from the lawn below. She'd been on her feet since 5 that morning. She'd made the potato salad, the deviled eggs, the lemon pound cake that Harlan Odom had specifically requested in the notes he'd left with his attorney. Small, precise notes that said more about the men than any eulogy could. Genevieve makes it best. Make sure there's enough. She was thinking about that note when the door opened without a knock. Her husband walked in like he owned the floor, which, as of approximately 2 hours ago, he did. The attorney pulled me aside. Curtis didn't take his jacket off. He didn't loosen his tie. He stood in the center of the room with his shoulders set in a way she hadn't seen before, or maybe she had and it had always meant something she'd chosen not to read. Daddy left everything to me. Genevieve turned from the mirror. The reading isn't until Thursday. He gave me the highlights. Said it was important I understood the scope. Curtis walked to the window. Below someone laughed at something, and she recognized the laugh as belonging to her neighbor, Dot Waverly, who had driven 2 hours to be here and brought a ham. The house in Savannah, the lake property, the commercial buildings downtown, the investment accounts. He paused like he was doing math in his head. Genevieve, we're talking about $23 million. She waited for the we to mean something. She waited for him to turn around and say, can you believe it, the way a husband says it to a wife, like they are the same person standing in the same future. He didn't turn around. Son left something for you too, he said, still watching the window. A box, small. Personal effects, Hayes said. Probably his mother's jewelry. Something sentimental. A box. She heard it the way you hear a door locking from the outside. Hayes has it at his office. You can pick it up next week. Next week, she repeated. There's something else. Curtis finally turned, and she saw it then. Not grief, exactly, but the absence of it. His father had died 3 days ago and his eyes were clear and calculating. I've been thinking and I want to be honest with you because I think you deserve that. She had been married to this man for 14 years. She knew what I want to be honest with you meant. It meant he had already decided. Things are going to look different going forward, he said. I'm a different person now, in terms of resources, in terms of options. I've felt limited, Genevieve, for a long time, and I don't think that's fair to either of us. You want a divorce? He didn't flinch. That was the part she would remember. He didn't even have the grace to flinch. I think we've grown in different directions. You've been happy here, with the school and your routines, and I think you'll be fine. You're a teacher, you have your career, you're capable. He spread his hands open. I just need room to become who I'm supposed to be. 14 years. She had graded papers at the kitchen table while he rebuilt his father's struggling property management company from a failing regional business into something worth $23 million. She had sat with Harlan Odom during his first hospitalization, when Curtis was in Atlanta closing a deal. She had learned to make lemon pound cake because Harlan mentioned once, just once, that his late wife used to make it. Get out of this room, she said quietly. Curtis blinked. Genevieve, not yet, just this room. Right now, get out. He left. She stood at the mirror and watched herself breathe. Downstairs, Dot Waverly was probably still laughing. The ham was still on the kitchen counter, and Harlan Odom's box was sitting in an attorney's office across town waiting. Attorney Dennis Whitfield had been Harlan's lawyer for 26 years. His office smelled like cedar and old paper, and he stood when Genevieve came in the following Tuesday, which was a small kindness she noticed. Mrs. Odom. He shook her hand with both of his. I'm so sorry for your loss. Harlan was a good man. He was the best man I knew, she said, and meant it. The box was on his desk. It was a shoebox, actually, a plain brown shoebox with her name written across the lid in Harlan's handwriting. For Genevieve, private. Dennis Whitfield said, he brought this to me 14 months ago. Right after his diagnosis, he was very specific. He didn't want it included in the estate documentation. He didn't want Curtis to know it existed. Genevieve set her purse in her lap and looked at the box. He said, Dennis, my son is a good man underneath it, but money is going to show me something I don't want to see. And when it does, Genevieve is going to need this more than I needed to be right. She pressed her lips together. Harlan had always talked like that. Like he'd already thought 3 steps past the moment everyone else was standing in. Dennis Whitfield walked to the window. She opened the box. Inside was a handwritten letter, folded in thirds, and beneath it a white envelope sealed with tape. Her name on that one too, in the same handwriting. The letter first. My dear Genevieve, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and Curtis has shown you something that broke your heart. I'm sorry. I raised him to be better than this. I spent a lot of years believing he would get there. I want you to know what I saw, even when I didn't say it. I saw you show up for this family every single time it mattered. I saw you sit with me during the treatments Curtis was too busy to attend. I saw you drive 3 hours round trip to pick up my medication when the pharmacy near my house was closed and Curtis didn't answer his phone. I saw the way you love quietly, without asking for acknowledgement, without keeping score. I kept score for you. The envelope beneath this letter contains a key. It's for a safe deposit box at First Covenant Bank on Millbrook Street. Ask for Patricia Osi, she's been expecting you. The account connected to that box was opened in your name 4 years ago. I've been adding to it steadily, from investments Curtis never knew about, from properties I kept in my name alone, from accounts that were always and only mine to distribute. The balance, as of last month, is $19 million. I know, take a breath. This money is yours, Genevieve, not Curtis's, not the estate's. Mine to give, and I am giving it to you. It's been documented and taxed and settled in a way that Dennis will explain. There is nothing Curtis can claim. But here is what I need you to do. Don't tell him yet. Get yourself situated. Talk to Dennis. Find a good attorney. Protect yourself first, protect your daughter second, and then, when you are standing on solid ground, decide what you want the rest of your life to look like. You have always been the finest thing to come out of this family. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it out loud. Your father in every way that counts. Harlan. Genevieve sat in Dennis Whitfield's office for a long time after that. She wasn't crying. She was past crying, into something quieter and more permanent. When Dennis came back in, she held up the letter and said, 19 million, 19.2, he said gently. The account has been earning. She didn't tell Curtis. She drove home, made dinner, helped their 11-year-old daughter Bea with a science project about the water cycle, and listened to Curtis talk about a property developer he'd had lunch with, a man with connections, a man who understood what Harlan's estate could become in the right hands. She nodded and passed the rolls. That night, after Bea was asleep, Genevieve sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and started writing things down. Not lists of grievances, just facts, dates, observations, a name she'd been turning over in her head since Sunday: Renee Castillo. Renee was a woman Genevieve had seen 3 times in the past 6 months. Once at the restaurant where Curtis said he was having a client dinner, once in the passenger seat of his car when she'd called him from a gas station, and he'd said he was at the office, and once last April at Harlan's birthday party, where she'd touched Curtis's elbow in the kitchen in a way that wasn't about business. She hadn't said anything. She'd been carrying it like a stone in her pocket, turning it over, not ready to name it. She was ready now. She called her best friend Paulette Rhodes at 10:30. Come over, Paulette said immediately. It's late, Genevieve. Come over. Paulette lived 6 minutes away and had known her since they were student teachers, sharing a classroom aide and a box of stale crackers during prep period. She opened the door with 2 glasses of red wine and pulled Genevieve inside without a word. Tell me everything, she said, from the beginning. So the window, the different directions, the box, the letter, the $19 million, and finally Renee. Paulette set down her wine glass very carefully. Renee Castillo, she said. The woman from the Hargrove Associates Gala. You saw it too. I saw something. I didn't know what to say. Nobody ever knows what to say. Genevieve stared at her glass. The problem is, now I know. And I don't know what to do with knowing. Paulette was quiet for a moment. Then she said, what does Harlan's letter say to do? Get situated, talk to Dennis, find a lawyer. Then that's what we do. Paulette reached across the cushion and squeezed her hand. We get you situated. And then we decide what kind of woman shows up on the other side of this. She said we the way a husband was supposed to say it. Genevieve noticed. First Covenant Bank was a 10-minute drive from the school where Genevieve had taught 4th grade for 9 years. Patricia Osi was a small woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a handshake that meant business. Mr. Odom called me personally, Patricia said, leading her to a private office. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of. No delays, no complications. She walked Genevieve through everything over the course of 2 hours. The account balance, $19.2 million. The investment portfolio Harlan had built over 15 years, separate from any assets Curtis knew about. The documentation, the tax records, the ironclad legal structure that Dennis Whitfield and a financial attorney named Grayson Bell had spent 6 months constructing. Your husband has no claim to this money, Patricia said plainly. It was a gift properly documented, made when Mr. Odom was fully competent and under no duress. As far as the law is concerned, this money has been yours for 4 years. Can Curtis find out about it? Not through any legal channel. Not unless you tell him, or he somehow accesses your private documents. Genevieve thought about Curtis standing at that window in his father's house, counting properties on his fingers. He won't find out from me, she said. That afternoon she met with a family law attorney named Sylvia Crane, whose name Dennis had written on a note card with the words "she doesn't lose" underlined twice. Sylvia Crane was tall, direct, and had the particular efficiency of someone who had heard every version of this story and knew exactly where it was going. "Tell me what you have," she said. Genevieve told her. The marriage timeline, Curtis's behavioral shift, Renee Castillo, the divorce papers she'd found half-drafted on Curtis's laptop when she was looking for the printer queue 3 days after the funeral, the conversation she'd replayed 40 times. Sylvia took notes without expression. "He had papers drafted before the will was even read," she said when Genevieve finished. Before the funeral guests left, Sylvia wrote something down and circled it. "That tells us a great deal about the timeline of intent." She set her pen down. "Here is what we're going to do. We file first. We file for divorce on the grounds of marital misconduct and document the affair. We request primary physical custody of your daughter. We freeze the joint accounts before he has a chance to move anything. And when Curtis's attorney starts making arguments about your financial situation," she paused, "and he will because he's going to assume you need his client's money. We let him build that case right up until the moment we show them what Harlan actually left you." Genevieve felt something solidify in her chest. Not anger. Something older and steadier than anger. "When do we file? How much time do you need?" She thought about Bia, about the school year starting in 3 weeks, about what stability looked like and what it cost to protect it. "A week," she said. "I need 1 week." The week was harder than she expected. Curtis came home every night and sat at the dinner table and talked about contractors and investors and a trip he was planning to Savannah to look at his father's property there. He told Bea stories about her grandfather with what seemed like genuine warmth. He was not in those moments a monster. He was a man who had decided that his own desires outweighed his obligations and who had found a way to live inside that decision without visible discomfort. Genevieve watched him and thought, "Money didn't change you, Harlan was right. It just showed you." On Thursday of that week, she was grading summer reading reports at the kitchen table when Curtis's phone lit up on the counter. He'd left it while he went to the car for something. "Can't stop thinking about this weekend, tell me we're still on." She looked at it for a long time, then she took a photograph of the screen. She sent the photograph to Sylvia Crane. "Good," Sylvia responded. "Timestamp is clean. Keep documenting." On Friday afternoon, Curtis sat down across from her at the kitchen table with a manila envelope, the same beige as the one Dennis had given her but full of different things. "I had my attorney draft some preliminary terms," he said. "I want you to know I tried to be fair. You keep your car, your personal items, your retirement account. I'll cover Bay's school costs through high school. Joint custody, alternating weeks. The house goes on the market since it's in both names, and we split the proceeds." Genevieve looked at the envelope. "My attorney will review these," she said. Something flickered in Curtis's expression. "You hired an attorney?" "I did, Genevieve." He said her name the way people say be reasonable. "You don't need to make this adversarial. I'm trying to handle this like adults, and I will," she said. "Through my attorney." He left the room. She sat at the table until she heard his car back out of the driveway and then she called Sylvia. "He served in formal terms," she said. "Expected. We'll respond through proper channels Monday morning." A pause. "Are you holding up?" "I'm okay, good, because I want you to hear something." Sylvia's voice shifted into something almost warm. "Curtis Odom has no idea what's coming. And I want you to let him keep not knowing until the moment it matters." Bea asked on a Tuesday morning over cereal whether her mom and dad were getting divorced. Genevieve had been expecting the question for 2 weeks. She still wasn't ready for it. "We're going through some changes," she said, which was the coward's answer, and she knew it. "Sophie's parents got divorced," Bea said. "Sophie said she gets 2 Christmases now." She stirred her spoon, but she also said she cries sometimes because she doesn't know which house feels like home. Genevieve set down her coffee cup. "Which house do you want to feel like home?" Bea looked up at her with Harlan's eyes, that same direct, unhurried gaze. "This one," she said. "With you." "Then that's what we're going to fight for," Genevieve said. She meant it like a promise. She said it like one. When Kurt heard from what she assumed was Renee's apartment given the hour, and his voice had the particular quality of a man discovering the board has been flipped, "You filed first." He said it like an accusation. "I did, Sylvia Crane." A pause. "You hired Sylvia Crane." "I did, Genevieve. That woman is a bulldozer. You don't need Curtis." She kept her voice level. "We'll communicate through our attorneys from now on. That's what they're for." She ended the call and sat on the edge of the guest room bed. She'd moved there 2 weeks ago, not because he told her to, but because she didn't want to share space with his particular brand of oblivious comfort anymore, and took 3 even breaths. Then she called Paulette. "He knows," she said. "How'd he take it?" "About like you'd expect." Paulette made a sound that was half laugh, half something sharper. "Good. Let him stew. There's something else." Genevieve paused. He said he's going to push for primary custody, said he has resources now, said Bia deserves stability and opportunities. Silence on the other end. He has not seen that child more than 40 minutes at a stretch in 3 weeks, Paulette said finally. He missed her school orientation. He forgot to call her on the first day of fall tryouts. Sylvia's going to make him explain every single one of those days in a courtroom and he is not going to enjoy it. Genevieve knew that. She knew it logically. But the knowing didn't stop the fear, which lived in a different part of her body than logic did. A woman named Renee Castillo called her on a Wednesday. Genevieve stood in the school parking lot after dismissal and stared at the name on her screen for 3 full rings before she answered. I know I have no right to call, Renee said. Her voice was smaller than Genevieve expected. I almost didn't. Why did you? A long pause. Because I was at his father's memorial last month, and I watched you work that whole event. The food, the guests, his cousins, everything. And I watched Curtis stand there accepting condolences like he'd carried the whole weight of it. And I thought, she stopped. I thought, that's not right. That's not who the hero is in this story. Genevieve leaned against her car. He told me you were cold, Renee said. Checked out. That the marriage had been over for years emotionally. He was very convincing, they usually are. I know that now. Another pause. He called me last week and asked me to say I'd seen you drink in front of Bia. He offered me money. Genevieve closed her eyes. I'm not going to do that, Renee said. I want you to know that. Whatever I did, I'm not going to do that. How much? 15,000. Did you screenshot the message? A beat of surprised silence. Yes, send it to this number. Genevieve gave her Sylvia's direct line, and thank you for calling. She stood in the parking lot for a long time after the call ended. A third-grade teacher walked past with a stack of folders and said, You okay, Miss Marsh? Getting there, she said. The custody hearing was on a Thursday morning in late September. Genevieve wore a gray blazer and her mother's pearl earrings. Sylvia met her on the courthouse steps with a legal bag over one shoulder and the calm expression of someone who had done this 1,000 times and expected to win. Across the lobby, Curtis stood with his attorney, a man named Bradford who wore expensive shoes and charged accordingly. Next to them, holding her own bag and looking like she was bracing for something she wasn't sure about, was Renee Castillo. Genevieve met Renee's eyes. Renee gave a small, careful nod. Behind Genevieve stood a group of people she hadn't entirely expected. Paulette in her blazer, Patricia O.C. from the bank, who had offered to speak to Harlan's intentions. B's teacher, a woman named Ms. Delgado, who had watched Genevieve volunteer in that classroom for 4 years. The school principal, Dr. Warren O.C., no relation to Patricia, who had written a character statement without being asked. Grayson Bell, the financial attorney, who was there to confirm Genevieve's independent financial standing when the time came. And at the end of the row, to Genevieve's surprise, an older man named Ezra Hollis, Harlan's oldest friend who had driven in from Chattanooga that morning. He'd called Genevieve the week before and said, in his slow, deliberate way, Harlan told me this might happen. He told me to show up if it did, so I'm showing up. She'd had to sit down after that call. Judge Carol Finney presided. She was sharp-eyed and methodical and she moved through the preliminaries without ceremony. Curtis's attorney went first. He painted a picture of a man of means, newly inherited, committed to providing his daughter with the best possible resources, private school, extracurriculars, travel, opportunities that a teacher's salary simply could not match. Judge Finney looked up from her notes. Counsel, I'll stop you there. Financial resources alone are not a determining factor in custody. What evidence do you have of your client's direct and consistent involvement in the child's daily life? Bradford paused a beat too long. We have specifically. In the last 60 days, Curtis's involvement in the last 60 days had consisted of 3 dinners, 1 school pickup, and a conversation about soccer that Bia had told Genevieve lasted approximately 4 minutes. Bradford pivoted. He introduced witnesses who spoke to Curtis's character, his ambition, his grief. He talked about the upheaval of losing a parent. He argued that Genevieve's emotional state following the separation made her an unstable primary caregiver. Judge Finney asked for evidence of instability. Bradford produced a statement from a neighbor Genevieve barely knew, which Sylvia dismantled in under 3 minutes by establishing that the neighbor had spoken to Curtis at a neighborhood gathering 2 weeks ago for 45 minutes. Then Bradford said, with what he probably thought was confidence, Your Honor, we have a witness who can speak to Mrs. Odom's behavior around the minor child. Renee Castillo stood up. Bradford faltered. Miss Castillo, would you? I'm here to testify for Mrs. Odom, Renee said clearly. The courtroom shifted. Mr. Odom asked me to say I witnessed Mrs. Odom drinking excessively in front of her daughter. I have the text message where he made that request and offered me $15,000 to provide that testimony. She held up her phone. I declined, and I'm here to tell the court what I actually witnessed. which is a woman who has been the consistent, present, capable parent in that child's life for as long as I've had any knowledge of this family. Bradford sat down. Judge Finney said, "I'll need to see that text message." Bailiff Curtis at the plaintiff's table had gone very still. Sylvia called her witnesses one by one. Ms. Delgado talked about Genevieve at every conference, every class event, every curriculum night. Dr. Warren Ossie spoke to her 9 years of professional excellence and community commitment. Patricia Ossie confirmed, carefully and within legal bounds, that Genevieve was financially independent and had been for years, that she required nothing from the Odom estate to maintain her household and her daughter's stability. Ezra Hollis took the stand and said, in his slow Chattanooga way, "Harlan Odom told me that Genevieve was the reason this family had any grace in it." He said, "Ezra, Curtis got the money, but Genevieve got the character. And I believe Harlan saw clearly." Judge Finney looked at Curtis over the top of her reading glasses for a long moment. Then she turned to Bradford. "Counsel, your client attempted to suborn perjury. That is not a minor matter, and I want to be very clear that this court takes it seriously. Additionally, the documented record of your client's involvement with the minor child over the past 2 months does not support the level of engagement he's claiming." She set down the folder. "I am granting primary physical custody to Mrs. Odom. Mr. Odom will have supervised visitation bi-weekly, contingent on completion of a parenting evaluation. Child support will be set at the statutory guideline rate. Any further attempts to intimidate witnesses or manufacture will be addressed as contempt. Do you understand, Mr. Odom?" Curtis nodded. He didn't speak. Court is adjourned. Outside in the hallway, Paulette wrapped both arms around Genevieve and held on. Patricia Ossie shook her hand. "Ms. Delgado tist, tell Bea we'll see her Monday." Ezra Hollis patted her shoulder without words, the way old men who have seen many things sometimes do. Across the lobby, Curtis stood alone. Bradford was already on his phone. Renee had gone. Genevieve didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired and certain and ready. She told Bea that evening, carefully and without venom, that she would be staying in this house, in this room, with this dog and this backyard and her mother, and that she would see her father on the weekends the judge had decided. Bea said, "Does Daddy know?" "Daddy knows." Bea thought about it. "Is he sad?" "I think he's learning some things, Genevieve's, grown-up things." Bea nodded like that made sense and went back to her book. Genevieve stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the house be quiet in a way that felt, for the first time in months, like actual quiet instead of held breath. She called Sylvia the next morning and said, "When do we tell him about the money? His attorney is filing a motion to revisit asset division, claiming you've concealed financial resources." Sylvia's voice was dry. "He suspects something. He just doesn't." "When's the hearing?" 3 weeks. "Let him wonder for 3 weeks," Genevieve said. Sylvia laughed. "A real one, not a professional one. Mrs. Odom, it has been a genuine pleasure." The asset hearing was almost anticlimactic by comparison. Bradford argued that Genevieve had hidden assets. He was not wrong technically, but he didn't know the shape of what he was asking about. Grayson Bell stood up and explained, in plain and precise language, that $19.2 million had been gifted to Genevieve Marsh Odom by Harlan Odom 4 years prior, fully documented, fully taxed, legally inviolable. That this money had never been a marital asset. That Harlan had seen to it, carefully and deliberately, that his daughter-in-law would be provided for regardless of what his son decided to do with his own inheritance. The room went quiet in a specific way. Curtis turned and looked at Genevieve for the first time since the custody hearing. She looked back at him steadily. He had $23 million and a Savannah property and a yacht he'd bought before the estate even settled. He also had a daughter who asked, every single Sunday, to go home to her mother. He had a father who'd known him well enough to plan for his worst self and loved him anyway. Genevieve hoped he would figure out, eventually, what to do with all of that. She didn't hold her breath. The following spring, Genevieve used a portion of Harlan's money to establish a literacy foundation in partnership with the school district. Books, tutors, and after-school reading programs for kids in 4 Title I elementary schools, including the one where she still taught 4th grade every morning. At the launch event in April, Bea stood at the little podium they'd set up in the school library and said into the microphone, with the particular confidence of an 11-year-old who has practiced, "My grandpa Harlan always said that the best thing you can do with more than you need is make sure someone else has enough. My mom is doing that, and I think he would really like it." The room applauded. Patricia Ossie wiped her eyes. Ezra Hollis, who had driven up from Chattanooga again, shook his head slowly in the way of a man who has just seen something confirmed. Paulette leaned close and said quietly, "Harlan would have loved this." "He did love this," Genevieve said. "He just planned it 14 months early." She thought about the shoebox, the letter. The key that had unlocked a life she hadn't known was waiting for her. She thought about the night after the funeral when she'd stood at that mirror, watching herself disappear. She hadn't known then that she wasn't disappearing. She was just between who she'd been and who she was about to become. She understood now what Harlan had really left her. Not the money, not the foundation, not even the legal protection he'd built around her like a wall. He'd left her the knowledge that someone had watched her, carefully and without announcement, and decided that she was worth fighting for. That her quiet, consistent, unglamorous love had been witnessed. That it counted. The rest, the 19 million, the custody, the foundation, B's face at that microphone. The rest was just what happened when a woman who knows she is worth fighting for decides to fight.